There is a primal scream rising on this planet, and as many would argue, from this planet. Think of it as a boiling point of pain and disconnection, a culmination of disappointment, if you will, that we are unwilling, or even more concerning, that we are incapable of closing the gap between knowing better and doing better. In my work with young people, I hear a common refrain: I'm not suicidal, but I'm not sure I want to be here anymore. This is a clarion call that something's got to give. The New York Times refers to this slow death of the human condition as a pandemic of loneliness. Mental health practitioners refer to it as a crisis of global proportions, leading to ever-increasing rates of suicide, self-harm, addictions of all sorts, violence against others, and a population increasingly dependent on mood-stabilizing drugs just to function. Bottom line, we are struggling to exist in a world our nervous systems were not designed for. To exist in a perpetual state of fight or flight is the greatest theft of our human experience. We're being robbed of our potential to live a life of peace and harmony. Is there a way out of this path of self-annihilation and mutual destruction? I believe there is. My hypothesis is that if we are willing to go to school on our wounding, to remove shame and blame from our past, to find grace in all that has come before, and with even greater courage apply a lens of love to the present moment, our future can be radically and beautifully different from our past. Our failure to learn from our past forever binds us to the suffering of our ancestors. Our inability to meet this pain with compassion and wisdom is a key point of frustration for many. That frustration is the catalyst for this podcast. The Primal Scream Podcast is an ongoing conversation with ordinary folks who have met their primal scream head-on and turned it into a powerful catalyst for change in their lives. They've stepped away from the performative expectations placed on them by their family and/or society, despite encountering resistance from within and external constraints along the way, leaving behind both the trauma of their story and the trauma drama that often ensues. Change is hard, but as these beautiful humans share their stories, we learn the intimacy of change is the opening to a life well lived. If you are feeling the existential dread of being alive on the planet at this time, you are not alone. If you're exhausted by the simple act of just being here, you are not alone. As you listen to these storytellers reveal their raw and real journeys to wholeness, it is our hope that you will find courage to do the same. Is there one message to take away from each of these podcasts? I believe there is, and it is simply this: you are not crazy, and you are not alone. Hi, welcome to the Primal Scream Podcast. I'm here with my dear friend Elizabeth Ferreira, and we are going to just follow the threads where they want to take us today. And I've been realizing as I've been chatting with some folks about being on the podcast with me and the words Primal Scream, I've had a mixed response. It's been fascinating. See, what seems so clear to me about what I mean when I say Primal Scream, I'm realizing, ooh, I got to back up. I got to back up a little bit further. So I'm going to put it to you, the expert here, having written your dissertation on something close to this. What does the term primal scream mean to you?
So the elements that kind of come up for me have to do with the body sensation and our parts. So for me, when you first kind of offered that question, I interpreted it as like that primal scream is the sound of often our most quiet parts, like the parts of us that have been suppressed or that a parent said, oh no, you ought not be that way. And so that primal scream is that kind of force inside of those repressed or quiet parts that we often don't show, finally kind of coming through the body, like demanding to be heard.
The word erupting
Yeah.
It's a kind of volcanic explosion, right? Like, so okay, I'm on the page with you. This is, for me, it felt like a lifetime of editing and tippy-toeing and going along to get along and reaching a point where I just could not do that any longer. And there was both the audible primal scream that came through me, but with it came an expression, a release, and an unleashing of parts of myself. Can you relate to that?
Yeah.
Where does that land? Yeah.
Yeah. No, like, at least for me in my kind of journey, along the path, there have been these parts that I very consciously either was like, oh no, oh God, is it still there? Like, oh man, here it comes. And I avoided them for a long time because they felt volatile or chaotic or wrong, whatever the story was.
Or can I add for my list, never ending. Like I would never, once I let it go,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to hold it together ever again.
Yeah.
It was like there was a scaffolding that had been holding me together and I was going to blow out that scaffolding. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it felt like that for me too. And it was sort of like the more I moved into authenticity, the less my body could pretend. Like the more I embraced those parts and kind of the masks I had worn got blown apart. If I went back and tried to put it on or someone tried to put that mask, my body was like, hell no, absolutely not.
Hell no. There's a before and an afterness.
Yeah.
A from and a to-ness to this expression. And as you know, we had a little chat before this recording session. That's what I'm trying to put words to and help others who are sitting at that edge of fear about letting loose. You know, if I really become my authentic self, I am going to risk my entire world, the people around me, perhaps my career, perhaps, my entire life path is going to shift. You had that when I first met you, you were a different person than you are now. And so pull that thread for a moment. Let's help people relate to it so that they can see that there is a there. Worth hanging in there for, even when it seems scary.
So my family of origin is like very interconnected and tight. So I grew up mostly with like cousins and aunts and uncles, and of course my mom and my dad. But none of them really had close friendships outside of the family system. It was very much like we are a family, you're friends with your cousins, right? Most of the time on weekends, we were at a family's house. I really didn't have a whole lot of time like playing with friends. And my family system is very dysfunctional. And at the time I didn't know. I thought, oh, this is just the way that it is. And I started feeling really depressed, and kind of my whole life I felt really othered. It felt very insane because there was often a lot of like contradiction in the system, and I learned very quickly, oh, I'm actually supposed to mirror back the dysfunction. My purpose is to keep everybody comfortable and to be the like good girl, and that's it. And so when I started getting older and I went into college, I had all this pressure my whole life of like, you have to be a doctor because your family's going to kind of like depend on you. And so you're the one that's going to college. And I was the only one in my family that's graduated college. Now the only one that's graduated from graduate school with a master's. So there was just a lot of pressure and no real room for me to be myself. And I didn't even know myself. And along with all this, I was experiencing a lot of relational and attachment trauma. Like my mom had a very unhealthy, enmeshed relationship with me. I was the best friend and I was the therapist. And then when it suited her, I was the daughter. And then I was, the thing that lived in the house that, she wanted to ignore sometimes. So, and then my dad was pretty absent. Like he worked and stuff, but there was no emotional connection or attunement there at all. So I was either a giver to my mom or I was in my room by myself, finally, like able to have like a breath. And I didn't know why, but I just felt so uncomfortable all the time. I felt I would have these like panic attacks at night when I went to bed. And it was like my body starting that scream of like, something is not right here.
Yeah.
And so I started kind of on this journey of being like, yeah, if this does not change, I'm probably not going to make it to 30 because I was so depressed. I was so unhappy. And so I just started living my life in kind of that F it mentality. Like if I only have until I'm 30, I might as well start saying yes to things and be okay with making people mad and do what I want finally. And it was actually that mentality that found me at your place because I was just meeting people for the first time. I had no idea what this was. And the invitation to be like, hey, do you want to come to this land and, meet Ben's mom, who's a shaman? And I was like, sure. Yeah, let's go.
Isn't it ironic? I think there's a nugget I don't want to gloss over it because I know others will recognize this as that moment where you have nothing to lose. You've sort of surrendered the old story. You don't know what's coming, but you just it's almost like I refer to the statement a lot of people say, I'm not suicidal, but I'm not sure I want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I don't care. I have, as they say, no more fucks to give.
Yep.
And it's at that moment, that's a breakthrough moment, actually. It's when you could care less that you begin to really care more.
Yep.
And so you really do have to break out of the old story for the new story, even to have a possibility of potential for us. And so many people are afraid to take that next step because the old story is all they've ever known. I loved what you said a moment ago about this was my family system. I had no other frame of reference. This is where I learned the rules of my existence. I remember a woman meeting my family when I was about 13 years old. And she looked at me and she goes, I think I'm going to hire you, come babysit for me. She's from Arkansas. Come babysit for me every weekend. You're going to be my part-time nanny. And what I realized later was she was sparing me the ritual of inappropriate behaviors with all the people that would show up on the weekends at my parents' house. And she would just, pick me up on Friday after school and take me to school on Monday morning and just spared me this whole. And she was the first person to really reflect to me, what's happening there is not normal. And you do not have to be a part of that. And it was a lifeline to me. Can you, and I wonder if others listening to this can relate to that, how it only takes one adult outside of our family system to look at us in the eye and say, this is not normal and this is not for you. And to see yourself with a different mirror, changes the possibilities there. Who gave you that mirror? Can you relate to that? Was there anybody that offered you a new lens on yourself?
I think it was my partner, Forrest. He came into, because he's one of the few people in my life now that has actually been met my family. And it was interesting because my mom was like, oh, I don't like him. And I was all like, well. And the thing about Forrest and I's relationship, when we started dating, I decided I was consciously going to do the opposite of everything I had done before. So I was like, no matter what, I'm just going to choose to love this person, even if it smashes me. And if I have an impulse to do this, F it. Let's see what happens if I do the absolute opposite. And in many ways, I did the absolute opposite of what my family taught me how to do. And so he really kind of started to hold up that mirror of hey, this doesn't seem quite right.
Right. I had a therapist when I was 20 years old look at me and say, pretty much after hearing my family story, say, if your family doesn't like what you're doing, you're probably on the right track, and to trust that. Yeah. And that was such oh my goodness, here's an adult saying I should break the rules of my family system. So, all right. So now we're stepping into authenticity. Woo, tender toes, right? Tender toes, moving forward, trying all the things, playing a little bit with I'm wondering if it was the same for you. There were these little whisperings, these little breadcrumbs to my soul that had laid out before me, but I'd never trusted them until I started to really take some risks in my life. And then I followed one of those breadcrumbs, and it was oh, I really like who I am on this path. This is how do we explain this to others to start to feel into those risks and take them with some excitement, some curiosity rather than fear?
Mm-hmm. Well, how I relate to that was I started moving into what makes me happy. What actually makes me feel good? What do I like? And so for me, that was really dance. And kind of before I met Forrest and y'all, I was in the fusion community in Sacramento in the Bay Area, which is kind of that in-between space between ecstatic dance and West Coast swing. And it was the first space that I had ever entered. That one, I felt completely safe. There were really amazing men there that were holding up a really good container for women. You were free to be kind of in your sensuality, that you were honored. There was a lot of consent and appreciation and
good boundaries.
And great boundaries, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was just a place where you could go and be surrounded by people who just want to dance. And then you have that kind of somatic experience, that attunement. You're able to be in connection without having to freaking talk. It was great. And so I followed that, and that path took me to some really awesome places. And then eventually that's where I met Forrest, and then kind of entered in the West Coast swing community, which then I really met the people that I feel like I was supposed to meet, that really started to kind of change my life. But I feel like it was me following joy. Who are the people that my body feels fuck yeah, I want to be around you, versus ugh.
Yeah, stay back. Yeah. I you followed the wisdom of your body, and for me that language was, I'm going to trust my nervous system as my GPS. That if I, and it was the first time my whole life had been spent dumbing down my reactions to things so that I could stay alive in the system, so that I could keep a roof over my head. I remember once at 17, my father blew up at me over something, and he said, that's it, you're out of here. And I don't know where I found the strength to say this to him, but I said, nah, that's not how it works. You're the adult. I'm the child. I'm here. You're here to raise me. You don't get to boot me out. This is not how this works. You're not going to threaten me. And he just was like aghast at that moment. And he goes, go to your room. And I was like, okay, that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But, but not kicking me out at 17. That's not what we do. It's like, I had to be the parent in my own family. Parentification is a term that we hear a lot. And I think when our parents are not up to the task consciously or experience wise to really be our good, solid anchors as parents, sometimes we have to become that for ourselves. All right. So you're taking risks. You're following the flow. When I first met you, we had a moment, and it was you were coming to meet Ben's mom. I don't think of myself as a shaman. I blushed a little bit as you referred to me that way. I just figure I'm on the path of figuring me out, and anybody else who wants to come along, let's unpack this together. And I just remember that you had such a beauty and light about you, and you were still very shy and timid about it. And yet I could see in you something perhaps that others couldn't. And I remember you just kind of shying away and not really ready to be fully seen. But in that space and time we were together, you allowed yourself to be seen. And then it was like you were on a roll. I watched you like, I'm a dancer and I'm going to go study somatics. Like you dove in. Can you talk about that moment when you began to really trust that?
Yeah. So for me, I experienced it as this like quite a activating experience, like a rapid degree of like shedding my skin, like a reptile. Like my skin got too tight, and then I'd have to, and it took an immense amount of effort every single time. And in my body, it would feel like panic, like I would start to like sweat, like the anxiety would increase. I'd even have like emotional flashbacks. And looking back now, I realized the times when I was very removed in a social group, I was gone. Like I was in a CPTSD trigger, like something was happening inside. So for me, it was this feeling of immense amount of discomfort, like, and getting frustrated with it and kind of angry, like, this feels unjustified. Like, I shouldn't have to effort this hard to just be with somebody. I shouldn't have to like move through all of this pain that I'm having to regulate and kind of hold all of my parts, because I would have these moments of going like, not trusting myself, being able to read like the social cues of everything, because my family system was so the opposite. So I remember kind of this like change energy accruing. It felt kind of like chaos in my body, where like I felt like kind of I was starting to rip at the seams a little bit, and I was just kind of like, oh my God. And I remember I was at the table with Forrest's dad, Rick, and he just was all like, so what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, man, of all the questions, really? Right. And now internally, I'm like feeling like I got all this trauma, like swirling around. I'm feeling like dissociated. He's asking me the question. I'm like, fuck, what's the right answer? I don't know. Like, I felt totally blown apart. And he just was very gentle about it. And he's like, maybe you should think about somatics. Or, hey, why don't you come over and we'll talk about it? And it was just this very kind of gentle guide. And so I remember, I don't know if I've told anybody this, but I was really thinking about it, and I talked to my parents about maybe going back to school, and my mom freaked out. She yelled at me. She said that I was going to ruin my life being in so much debt. Yeah, her fear kind of came up. And so I decided, okay, well, my life was no longer serving me. It was getting too small. The dancing started to feel numb and diluted. And I was like, ugh. So I was like, okay, if I'm supposed to get this education, then I'm only going to apply to one school and one program. And I was like, and if I don't get in, then that's the answer. But if I do get in, then I got to do it. Even if I go halfway through and realize like maybe I can't get through it. Like, and then I got in. And I was like, okay, this is what I signed up for. And for the first year of my program, I was commuting from Sacramento to the Bay Area. So I was basically living out of my car for a year.
It's interesting when we leave our family systems behind, how they pull at us, right? There's all the reasons you can't be bigger than us. You can't be, how dare you? So I'm sure there was the economic concern, because it is a big deal for kids to go into school debt for sure. We didn't have that much in my generation. And I only did 2 years of college, and it was junior college. Like my parents didn't even cough up for that. It just didn't happen in my family system for school. And so I can imagine there was that little bit of you maybe feeling like, oh, this is another way that I'm breaking out of the family system, doing the opposite of what my family system would try and keep me constrained and small and the skin too tight. You know, I learned something about butterflies about a year ago. We all know about metamorphosis, but what I didn't realize is many butterflies and moths go through between 3 and 5 complete sheddings of the caterpillar skin before they finally go into the cocoon. And so there's this awareness in my own story where I shed a skin here, and then I got a little bit bigger, and I shed another skin and got a little bit bigger and shed another skin until finally I went into the deep cocoon. Mm-hmm. Have you been in the cocoon? Can you relate to that depth?
Oh yeah.
Of disintegration of self.
Oh yeah. So here we go. So so right when the pandemic hit, my life radically changed, because all of the things I had done to just kind of like be okay, kind of like keeping all the holes plugged on the ship were like gone. And I found myself back in my childhood room, back in the home with my parents, back to feeling like exactly how I felt. And more uncanny, I was homeschooled the majority of my life. And my parents had this program where a teacher was basically filmed, and I would put in like the DVD or the VHS and watch it. And so then my whole program went over Zoom. So my whole existence turned into this massive, massive trigger. Like I started breaking down in class. I couldn't handle it. I could barely handle sitting in front of the Zoom meeting because I was just being bombarded with like flashbacks of, like the horrible things that happened to me. And I got really, really close to ending my life, if I'm being very honest. It was like so unbearable. And I actually like appreciate that experience because it gave my younger self confirmation. I was like, oh, it was this bad. Oh, like you're not crazy. This is horrible.
Yeah.
And so
we work hard to normalize it, didn't we?
Yeah.
And then when you realize this is not normal, your younger self says, finally, somebody's paying attention. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I relate. Yeah.
So kind of in that, me and Forrest were in a little bit of like a uncertainty in our relationship. And so then he gets a place because his parents were being very careful. And it wasn't even posed to me like, oh, you're going to come move in with me. It was like posed as a visit. And I really struggle with like imposing on people. Like that is like a huge thing for me. Like I have to be very certain, like, okay, but I am invited. It's okay if I'm here. And then I want like, okay, how long do you expect me to stay? Like I get very triggered with kind of all of that. And so it was a moment where I totally leaped off into uncertainty, and I just packed up my car with as much like of what I felt was important, and I left. And I have not been back since.
Oh, there are two threads I want to pull out of this. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is one, and the other is this place of no contact.
Yeah.
Because the numbers are staggering right now. How many young people are zero contact with their parents? So you were right in the sandwich between those two. Like I don't want to be a burden on anybody. That's the CPTSD piece of our story, right? Where we're too much. We ask too much, that just our existence is too much for our caregivers. They don't know how to cope with the needs of a child. So we forever believe that we are asking too much just to exist in our own family structure. And that leads to this rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Like, I loved what you said. I had to be invited. It has to be so clear that I'm wanted somewhere, or I feel like I'm on the outside and I'm a burden. You relate to that? And for those that I'm late to the game in this definition, but it really applied to me. There were so many situations in my life where, unless it was absolutely clear that I was invited to be there, I never felt like I fit in. And yet there was a longing for me to belong somewhere. But I put a lot of conditions in the path to that. And then the no contact piece. So unpack all that, please.
So I think with my rejection sensitivity, it's also attributed to being neurodiverse, kind of somewhere within that kind of ADHD spectrum, and also having CPTSD for sure. And I really resonate because, like, I often felt like things were the most easy in my family system when I was pretty absent from it. Like if I kind of was leaned back or just like quiet. And I learned how to kind of move through a house, like not making any noise, being pretty mousy, quiet, pretty invisible. Yeah. Which is now a superpower today because I scare Forrest often. Like he'll just turn around and there I am. He's like, ah! He's like, I got to put a bell on you. So how that started to kind of like show up for me with that like invitation piece is that I would feel like physically sick being in a space that I didn't know the rules. Like I didn't know, like, okay, but how am I supposed to comport myself in this space? Like, do I need to be like really humble and like quiet and like not make waves, or can I actually like kind of lean in a little bit? Like, and really hard for me to gauge that.
Can I unmask?
Yeah. How much of the weirdness are we like comfortable with?
That's right.
But the choice kind of like for me also to go no contact was that when I started to also finally get a really good therapist, and we started to really kind of unpack what happened. it was reflected back to me like, oh, this is like capital T trauma. Like this is textbook kind of in a way.
Right.
And what I noticed was as I was going through that kind of healing journey and like kind of processing with my therapist, it was like a moment where the past and the present got kind of overlaid with each other. And so my every day was just sort of this never ending experience of feeling triggered, assaulted by the past. Oh God, here's like another thing that happened. And it was just a lot of that thing that I had always kept in, which I have to make sure I'm invited, you know, like, or I need to know the rules of how much do I let out. Finally, it's like it stopped. It was like, I'm not going to listen to you anymore, Elizabeth. It's all coming out right now. And it was the most vulnerable I had ever been. And I remember like several times just like totally losing it with Forrest, where like something triggered me and I just started like gagging and almost like throwing up and like screaming that primal scream, just like screaming like I had never screamed before into our carpet.
You go to a very young place, a very young, wounded place, and to be met with somebody who's not shaming you for it, not diminishing you, saying, stop that, you're too much. You can finally be witnessed in that trauma. That's a big moment.
And for me, there's often this real somatic experience of almost like a hand coming up and like holding my throat like this, because my mom, when I was little, would say, you can cry, but you can't scream. So I was never allowed to have a tantrum. I was never allowed to like scream and cry. It was always had to be quiet and contained, and it could only come out as tears.
Wow.
So it was this
now
years of pressure.
Now, as a now practicing therapist, what would you say to that part of you that was finding her voice, finding her scream? Because I think the two are very much the same mechanism. That before we have the language to express all of that inner, eruptive emotion, it's just raw scream. It's just a primal response to the pressure. How do you process that with your own clients now? Because I think a lot of people are walking around right on the edge of a primal scream. That's the whole point of these conversations, is to help people normalize their reaction to a world that is not serving us. If we're not in primal scream for our own history individually, we are for what's happening collectively. Like I think the world is walking around one great big huge dysregulated mob, and acting out on each other. And there is a primal scream underneath all that if we could begin to open up to the release of that trauma, we might be able to find some language that could move us forward into our more authentic, regulated selves. So, yeah, give us some wisdom here, Mom. Teach us.
So, kind of from my practice, I've learned that the thing that actually silences us, is a really wise system, and that it's often very protective, and it can be out of our control. Like, I still to this day, sometimes this part will not let me scream, and sometimes it has good reason for it. So it's about befriending that piece first and acknowledging that will not allow something bad to happen, because it's the fear. If I really scream, or if I do finally let my body respond in the way that it needs to, oh my God, something horrible is going to happen. Like I'm going to lose the attachment, or, oh God, something else is going to happen. So it's about really getting to know the part that silenced us, learning that it is a valuable part of ourselves, that it's protective. It's been a wise protector this whole time. And learning what does it need to feel safe, to then allow this scream to happen, to allow that truth to come out.
Yeah. So the no contact piece, I went no contact with my dad, very close to the last couple of years of his life. And I ran up against all of the messaging of, how dare you? He's an old man. How could you do this to him? And I didn't actually confront him. I just disappeared. I did not want to engage further to say, I'm going no contact with you. Went against what my own nervous system was saying. No, that means I'm engaging. So I'm just going to disappear. And he might chase a little bit. And he did. He chased a little bit, but I just kept listening. My nervous system became, again, my GPS. Like, what does my nervous system want? It was such a foreign thing for me to ask, where is the ease in this question? And going with the answers that brought me ease, that became my new GPS in every, am I finding ease in this answer? And the answer was no, then I'm going to choose something else. And it's, I feel bad for parents because I have a child out of my 4 that has no contact with me. And so I have to deal with, what did I do wrong? How is there a path to redemption between parents and children? And with my child and I, we're tenderly finding our way to each other. And I really, because of what I had to go through with my no contact period, trust that she's, first of all, this is her right as an adult child to create a boundary where she does not feel safe. And my work then is to figure out what I'm doing that makes her feel unsafe. And I realized it was because I wasn't safe within myself. I wasn't honoring my own choices and really living in my most authentic self. So that's been my work, is to go deeper and deeper into my authentic self. And now she's starting to feel it more into her authentic self, and we're finding our way back to each other. But this is a big thing when roughly a third of young adults are saying, I want no contact with my parents. It's incredible. It's a movement. It speaks to the volume of unmet collective and individual wounding that is coming forward. As parents, we were not raised and had as many tools, consciousness tools, therapeutic tools, somatic tools to bring forward. And I think it is part of the evolution of our species to be cycle breakers for all that has come before. So what's your wisdom on all that? How do parents and children find redemption with each other? Because I'll tell you what, that's my biggest, when I sit in the yurt now with family systems, and sometimes it's the parents who've done their work finally to come into their most authentic, conscious selves, not perfect, but doing their work, owning their past, owning the ways that they've been unconscious. And I want to bring my kids, or it's the kids who say, I'm doing my work and I'd like my parents to come. So when we do these multi-generational cleanup on aisle 3 sessions, I call them, it's like a whole family system gets healed. It has such a profound magnifying effect on the entire ecosystem of that family when multi-generations, 2 or 3 generations can be in the same space, all coming into their awareness that, wow, we've been living out a story, a lineage of trauma that is no longer ours to carry. And when you can do it with multi-generations at once, the impact on past and present and future generations, it feels like this is the only way forward, is we have to do this. So what are your thoughts on how families come together? Because some young person's going to listen to this and go, I miss my parents, but I also know that I'm not safe with them. So how do we go forward from here? How do we build that bridge?
Okay. What I feel is that it's taking responsibility for our own suffering. Like the parents owning their material, the kids owning their material. And like what I really feel kind of like at least set me into no contact or low contact, and then what I witness with some other people that I sit with is that it's that psychic force when like everybody else is putting stuff on you and your nervous system and your body to hold, and one person cannot hold the dysregulation for an entire family system.
That's right.
And I think most parents are unconscious to that, of like how much psychic force and overwhelm and stress they just put on their kids if they are not tending to themselves, if they have not done their inner work or are tending to their little parts that kind of like are freaking out and probably not feeling safe either.
Yeah.
And what I witness is that with people, with parents who can do that, there's often that road to repair. But if a parent cannot do that, then it's too toxic. It's like, and kind of in my situation, I don't know if in this lifetime my mom will ever do her work, but it is so toxic that I cannot be around it.
I had this, I'd love to get your feedback on this. When I had my pulmonary embolism and went to the other side in that near-death experience, I there were no boundaries, right? That we come from a boundaryless experience, unified field of consciousness, right? And that when we come into this physical form, it is to experience boundaries. And that worked me for the longest time, like, oh, physical, psychic, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, like instead of being of one mind, of one heart, of one breath, of one awareness, if I were to throw my big toe, my big theory of everything out on the table here, it's that we came to learn how to love in a boundaried, we know what unboundaried love feels like. What is boundaried love? Where do I end and you begin? And where do we open our boundaries to the point where we can feel unified, but in a boundaried existence? And I realized my boundaries were violated so early, almost from the very start of my experience on this human plane, that my whole, if you look at my timeline, it's boundary violation after boundary violation after boundary violation, to the point where I finally began to set boundaries. And with my own father, and setting those boundaries near his death, he finally recognized that I was a separate being from him, that he had always carried somewhat of an entitlement of access to me. And I think there are a lot of parents that feel an entitlement of access to their children. And when I got clearer and clearer about no, where I end and you begin is I'm claiming a boundary. And if he lived a few more years, I think we might have gotten to the place where we could have reconciled. My mom and I finally did before she passed away. And so sometimes this work has to be done in proxy, has to be done in therapy. And And thank God for all the people who are jumping into therapeutic careers now to help the whole world who's waking up to a lifetime from the beginning of time where others have felt an entitlement of access to our boundaried self. And I think the world would be a much safer place if everybody understood the concept of boundaries. And I'm wondering where your thoughts land on that.
I had a mentor tell me that boundaries are the space that I need to love you. And that has really landed with me as someone who comes from a system where I really wasn't allowed to have boundaries, especially emotional or attachment boundaries.
Right.
And so kind of learning that of like, oh, okay, like what's the space that I need so that I can show up, that I can have a moment of that connection and feel safe and good in it. And then what, and knowing that those boundaries are kind of a living organism. They rise and they fall. They're not static. They get to change. And that's kind of helped me. One thing that I notice as a trauma therapist is that a lot of time the work is boundary work. And often there is a very strong trauma response around feeling into your no. Like feeling that part of you that's saying, no, I don't like this. No, I don't want that. Because, ooh, how terrifying when you were little to go like, ooh, I don't want my mom to hug me, or ooh, I don't want to like be here right now. Like really big consequences if you said no.
Right. Especially where men were concerned. Oh, go give your grandpa a hug. Go give your, and when a man doesn't have good boundaries and starts to physically interact with a little girl, there's a tension there that she doesn't understand. And the same is true for boys. I can just only speak to my own experience here, but this concept of boundaries also plays out on a humanity scale between me and we. How does the individual express in a communal space where it's not safe? And when individuals are repressed, then the communal well-being is impacted as well. So if I think of, what heaven on earth must feel like, and it's interesting how many people, when I ask them to describe what they think of as heaven on earth, there's a wistfulness in their description. Like, I think it would feel like we would all feel safe to fully be ourselves, and that we would have created a world where that was possible, where the individual could fully express, and we'd all be better off for that person's full expression in this life, that nobody would be repressed. And so it's that balance between the me and we. If I think about, okay, if the grand plan, if there is a God, if there is a source code, if there is some higher being, higher source, however people construct our reason for being here, I think ultimately it's boundaries. And maybe this no contact is a resetting of those boundaries. It's a way that our consciousness is evolving generation by generation. In your generation, and even I heard somebody call the alphas, which are the ones that are being born now, honey badgers. that they are like, don't touch me. Like they have like an energetic awareness of their boundaries that tells me that we're on the right path. That parents are giving their kids, no, you don't have to take a hug from Uncle Tom. And it's okay if you don't want a schmoochy kiss from grandma. That's okay. Like it's okay to claim some boundaries instead of, oh no, go give them, like we're not doing that anymore. And these kids, I always have this sense that it takes 3 generations to clean up the mess on aisle 3. There's the first generation that says, I don't want to live this way anymore. The next generation says, I'm going to live my life. And the third generation doesn't even have to have that inner conversation. They just are. They just are. And I think we're right in this, we'll call it a primordial soup of merging from the caterpillar, who's, the path of the caterpillar is to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat every moment of every day to get the energy they need to go into the cocoon, to create this space for this complete disintegration of the caterpillar and those, what do they call them, imaginal buds that reside within that cocoon space to finally have their full expression, to become the butterfly. And I feel like this, the chaos that we're in right now across the planet, the 4B movement, the unrest in the geopolitical landscape, the unrest in our own country, right now, the political strife that we're in, the assault on women's rights, all of that is this primordial goo, this cauldron of shift that's calling us forward. And I think it's to really get clear about, zero contact with the old way. It doesn't work for us. And we're becoming conscious enough about that to set some clear boundaries with the systems, with the institutions, with the zeitgeist, with the conditions of our human story are not working for us. And that's why nobody can get in to see a therapist for 6 months.
I know. No, it's horrible.
But here's the great news, right? Because the stigma of needing help is breaking down finally.
Yeah.
And so I'm as a sort of a seer of big picture stuff. What are you encountering in your therapeutic practice? If you could, throw some threads out there, so people might begin to say, "Oh, I'm experiencing that," or recognize that you're not alone, you're not crazy. Is my number one thing I say to people is hang in there. We're all going through this. You're not alone. You're not crazy. I'd love to get your wisdom as we wrap this conversation here.
So kind of to get in there, I really feel that chaos, that chaotic feeling or that dysregulation, chaos is the elements necessary for creation. We have to feel that inner chaos. And then if we're lucky, we learn how to kind of guide it in a way of ooh, something just got blown apart. I'm feeling delightfully horrible. Or maybe just, triggered beyond all hope. But the light at the end of the tunnel is ooh, but something good is now going to happen. Something better is coming. And so that's kind of the journey I witness in everybody, is that if you are willing to face the dreaded experience, if you are willing to hold all that chaos, and it will be unbearable. You will think you won't be able to hold it. You will think it will blow you apart. I guarantee you it won't. But if you can, relief exists at the end of that experience.
Yeah.
And what I witness are people coming in that chaos energy. Their body is screaming, I cannot be around these people anymore. I cannot do this job anymore. This entire world is effed up. And then they're coming in wanting to be okay, how do we make it better? And I'm I don't know. It sounds pretty sane to me. What your body is. It sounds like an appropriate reaction considering where your body's been, the environment your body's in. And the more people start to trust their body, trust their nervous system, shift from I'm the problem to there is a problem, right? Then all that chaos starts to make more sense. And I feel like it becomes like an inner roadmap for people where it's like, oh, this is what my no feels like. This is what my yes feels like. This is what it feels like when I'm attuning to a degree of inauthenticity in someone, and I can actually feel that, and I'm not crazy for feeling that. I can tell, or this is what my inner BS meter is like. I can trust that.
Yeah.
And a core theme is that there are a lot of people right now that are separating from their family systems, or that are thinking about it, or that are creating just a little bit of space, because a family system, it's like its own animal. It's not going to allow someone to be in that chaotic flow or energy. It's not going to allow for that transformative energy to accrue. They will come in and try to like suck you back in, or like, no, sit in the role you've always done, or, oh, you're looking crazy now. Like, you better take these meds, or you better go to a therapist to fix you. And it's like, what happens if you just take a step out of it? Do you start to feel better? Does this signal that your body's doing start to make more sense? And is it believed? And that is what I feel like. I kind of struggle sometimes with the word therapist, because most of the time I'm like, I don't even know what the hell I'm doing in there. Like, I have like some technique and stuff, but most of the time there is like a power beyond my own consciousness that steps in. And it happens when two people are being authentic with each other. When I am witnessing you and I'm allowing to some degree you to witness me. You're not responsible for my shit because I'm holding the space for you. But I will be honest. I will let you see the basement of me and be like, yeah, there's some stuff in there.
Well, I think that's I love Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. She says, as you step in, you feel there's this beckoning and the becoming. There's something that pulls us forward, but then there's also this is my language, reckoning and the beckoning. And she says it's going to feel very dysregulating as you go sane.
Yep.
We're coming out of insanity into sanity, and it has a very similar energetic signature to what insanity feels like. But what you begin to recognize is there is relief in that sanity. Like you are, I just remember how hard it was for me to set a boundary with my parents, and others. And I think what we have to get so comfortable with is that my clear no is actually a gift to everyone in my field. Even the person I'm saying no to, because it's an opportunity for them to then sit with their discomfort and do their own work around, well, why doesn't she want to be in relationship with me? And if I can say to her, look, I'm not here to cause you any harm. I just know that I've reached a limit and I can't go any further with you. And then I want this to be an invitation for you to go figure out something. I'm not going to step into your process. It's your process. I'm not going to take responsibility for your feelings. All I can do is take responsibility for mine, and mine is a clear no. And people feel like they're being selfish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
I always jump in and I change it to being self-full.
Yeah, me too. Me too. That's the language I want people to hold here. Is it's not being selfish when you're taking care of yourself. And the more that we as individuals know our boundaries, know our no and our yes, equally important. That is when, imagine being in a social construct with other humans where everybody's clear. There are no hidden agendas. There's no passive aggressiveness. There's no the games being played in order to one up or stay safe in somebody else's world. Imagine that we all just, our yes and our no's were our truth. Then I would hear somebody else's no and go, oh, thank you so much for having such a clear boundary on that. Don't take it personally. There might be a personal message in there for me to go work on something, but I don't feel attacked by somebody else's no. And I think that's the more we normalize this conversation, normalize this languaging of this evolutionary process that we're going through, the more we empower people to claim their no and enthusiastically enjoy their yes. Like, it's not selfish, it's self-full, and you get to be all of you. Your full expression is the gift that you get to. This is where the religion stuff gets really gnarly. This puritanical, you have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. I don't buy that story at all. And I had, because of my 35 years in the church, that was one of the biggest hurdles I had to get over. No, in fact, the more I lean into my fullness, my self-fullness, the more of a gift I am to everything around me. There are no winners and losers in this story. If we're doing it right, it's a win for all of us. The individual can fully express, and that becomes a gift to the communal well-being. So give me your I mean, you wrote your dissertation on a lot of what tell us your final words of wisdom here, my dear friend Elizabeth.
Well, let me pull up a quote, actually, that is a real foundation for me. So this quote really kind of summed up my whole paper. And it's by a Jungian analyst. Her name was Marion Woodman. And it's from a book called Coming Home to Myself. Children not loved for who they are do not learn how to love themselves. Their growth is an exercise in pleasing others, not in expanding through experience. As adults, they must learn to nurture their own lost child. There's personal anger, but underneath, there's often universal rage. And when you are possessed, God help the man who's on the end of that. Deep rage is not about the man. Deep rage is this: nobody ever saw me. Nobody ever heard me. As long as I can remember, I've had to perform. When I tried to be myself, I was told, that's not what you think. That's not what you ought to do. So just like my mother and her mother, I put on a false face. My life became a lie. That's deep rage. We have lived our lives behind a mask. Sooner or later, if we are lucky, the mask will be smashed. What a relief to be human instead of the god or goddess my parents imagined me to be, or I imagined them.
Wow. May it be so, right? Like that we could all take off the mask and just be without performative expectations placed on us or self-imposed along the way. And it is such a joy to be on this path with you, my sweet sister. I know we've got years and generations separating us, but I do not feel older. I just feel like we're just showing up at the right time in our human experience and helping others do the same. And your vulnerability and your work has a ripple effect, right? With each person that we help work through this primal scream, work past the fear, get over the dysregulated nervous system that's going to come to the surface in this. Like I always say to people that they go, but I'm a mess. I'm a fucking mess. How am I supposed to cope? And you go, what you've done is you've released the nervous system of that inner child where you shut it down all those years. But now you have the adult coping skills, adult strategies here to support that nervous system, to co-regulate your dysregulated nervous system through breath, through somatics work. I mean, we have the tools now and the languaging to really help us I think, move pretty quickly through this because we're going to take shame out of this equation.
Mm-hmm.
There is no shame in this healing process. We are all waking up to this collective trauma together. You know, I think of CPTSD as both individual but also collective PTSD. And there's the trauma that we individually experience. There's the trauma of the society that we grew up in, and then there's the accumulative trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what's happening on the planet, it just puts an urgency to this work that we show up here and now.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your wisdom and your vulnerability, like really sharing those parts that give others permission to do the same.
Thank you,
sister.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Primal Scream Podcast. We appreciate your willingness to sit in the pain and exploration of a fellow human. It is our hope that you found a thread that you can weave into your own story going forward. There is great beauty on the other side of the primal scream. A wise elder once said, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." And we are not waiting any longer for someone or something to shift the human story from fear to love. It's on us to redeem ourselves from our individual and collective unconsciousness, to find our ease of beingness. The future belongs to those who show up. We'll leave you with the song Like the Children Do by Meredith McHenry. She reminds us that the way home is the path of innocence reclaimed. See you on the next podcast. Have a beautiful day.
Put down your armor, I'll put mine down too. We'll do like the children know how to do. Caused you. We'll pour it all out like the children do. Don't get me wrong, you can't walk over me. But I'm strong enough to hold you when you're weak. I know I fucked up and you sure have too. So let's just start over like children do. Can we just go back to the time before our innocence was stolen? I don't know how to get us there, but I'll keep hoping. I'll keep hoping. Children do. We can do like the children do. I'll open my bleeding heart to you. Let's just pretend for a minute or two that our hearts can bend without shattering through. We'll find that forgiveness as if we're brand new. And you'll walk through the fire like it can't burn you. Can't we do like the children do? 'Cause I don't want to say goodbye to you.